Okay, sure. Good. Yeah. Welcome. How long are you staying for us? A few hours, is that right? Go back today already. Okay. All right. Okay, very good. Nice to see you. Okay, everyone, good morning once again. And we are obviously going to continue. I hardly need to say that. Yesterday, we were having a look at the problem of ignorance at the very root of dependent origination and how that leads you to make bad choices. And it's kind of obvious when you're ignorant, when you are deluded and don't see things according to reality. It's kind of obvious that we're going to make bad choices. This is always the truth in life. If you don't know how to do things, you don't know where to go, you don't know what to do, then often because of that lack of knowledge or understanding or whatever, you're going to make bad choices. It's kind of very obvious in many ways. And this is why this idea of becoming wise and seeing things in accordance with reality is such a useful thing, because it is kind of obvious that if you see things in accordance with reality, if you know whether you have to go left or right, whether you have to, buy this or that to make things work out, whether you have to use a screwdriver or a Phillips head, the driver, it's helpful, because then you actually make the world, you can make the right choices, you can get things done in the right way. And the same thing is obviously true also on the spiritual path. You have to know where happiness is to be found to be able to pursue that happiness. Otherwise, it's going to be very problematic for you. So it kind of makes sense. So wisdom is really here just an understanding of the world, so that we can make good choices for ourselves. And eventually understand that the whole idea of making choices actually is counterproductive. So you give up choosing altogether and just kind of enjoy the bliss of being here without going anywhere at all, just hanging out and enjoying yourself. So now, what I'm going to do next, now having looked at the problem of ignorance and delusion at the very root of the path, we're going to ask the next question. That is, why is there ignorance? Once we understand that, remember, the Buddhist teaching is all about causality. It's all about conditionality. It's about why things are the way they are. Everything has a cause, and nothing is independent of other things. And this is kind of the idea of non-self. The idea of non-self is precisely that nothing is independent. Everything has a cause and has a condition behind it. So ignorance itself must have some kind of conditioning factor, and some kind of cause that strengthens it or makes it exist or whatever. And there is a wonderful sutta, this is from the Anguttara Nikaya 10, a sutta that I always like. I always bring it out every retreat, not every other retreat, every third I do look at this sutta, because I like it a lot, and it gives a sense of how to overcome that ignorance by understanding the causality. And so then you start with the cause for ignorance, and as always, when we have these conditioned sequences, we then trace it backwards, the cause of the cause, and the cause of the cause of the cause, and backwards like that, until you get to the cause of the cause of the cause, etc. So you go all the way back to the root. The idea is always to kind of try to find a root problem. So the root problem of dependent origination is ignorance. So then the question is, well, what is the root for overcoming that ignorance? What do we actually come back to at the very, very beginning? This is what we're going to look at now. So again, that's quite exciting. I reckon, I don't know if I find this is really exciting, even though I know exactly what it is. I still find it kind of, wow, this is cool. So we're going to have a look, check it out. So this is what the Buddha says. Now we are back to Bhante Sujanta's translation again. It's a bit random, but anyway. Mendicants. This is AN 1061, sutta called Ignorance of Vidya. mendicants, it is said that no first point of ignorance is evident, before which there was no ignorance, and afterwards it came to be. And yet it is evident that there is a specific condition for ignorance. That may seem like a self-contradiction. Yeah? There is no first point, and yet it has the condition. Yeah? And the idea here is that even though there is no first point, the idea is that ignorance can be strong or weak. And the strength of ignorance will depend on these conditions. So there is no absolute condition in the sense that ignorance is not there if the condition is taken away, but there's like a relative condition. So what we want to do then is we want to reduce that relative condition as much as possible. The more we can reduce that condition, the less ignorance it is, and the weaker that ignorance will be. And then when ignorance is really weak, it is not supported by these specific conditions they're talking about here, that is when we have the opportunity, maybe, to overthrow ignorance entirely once and for all. That's kind of the idea behind this, yeah? So even though there is no first point here, we want still to weaken it as much as possible to give us a chance, maybe, to go beyond ignorance altogether. Yeah? But let's start from the beginning here. So it starts off by saying there is no first point of ignorance that is evident. Yeah, and that is already quite an interesting statement. It means that if you go back in time, you go back into your past lives, you cannot discover the first point of ignorance. And essentially, that is the same thing as saying that there is no first point of existence. You go back to a past life, yeah, same thing. You go back and back and back, because ignorance and existence have to go together. Obviously, there's no ignorance if there's no existence. Ignorance is an aspect of existence itself. So you go back and back and back, and it doesn't matter. You cannot actually find the first point. And you will notice here that a very kind of slight distinction here. The Buddha doesn't say it goes back forever. Yeah, he doesn't say that this goes back forever. He says there is no first point that can be discovered. And this is kind of in accord with the Buddhist pragmatic ideas of truth. Yeah? Everything is very pragmatic. If you say that it goes back forever, you're making a statement that you can actually never really discover. You can never say, you can never go back forever. You cannot, there's a limit how far you can go back. So he says that as far as I have checked it out, going back, there is no first point to be seen. That's this is a very good indication of how the Buddha operates. Always operates from known things, always operates from insight into what actually is visible and seeable. It never goes beyond the evidence. It sticks very strongly to the evidence. And it does that also in the way he teaches. There's no kind of philosophy or speculation or metaphysics, whatever you want to call it, in this. There is just what he has discovered. Everything is that. This is a very good example of that. There are some parallel suttas, I think, in the translation to different languages where they haven't actually got that point properly. And they actually do translate it as, it goes back forever. Ignorance kind of goes back forever. It's endless. But that is when that kind of translation mistake actually makes a big difference. Because one of them, it actually is two quite different ways of phrasing things. And to me, one of them is far more in tune with how the Buddha goes about with his teachings, and to me much more kind of acceptable as well. So, and this is interesting, right? So there is no first point that can be discovered, and this is one of the things that makes the Buddhist teachings kind of unique in the world. And almost all philosophies in the world, all religions in the world, even science, start with the first point. The world is created. Right? This is common to everything, everywhere in the world. The Brahmanical teachings that were there before the Buddha, they had this creation myths, how the world came into being. And they have many variety of different creation myths. Some of them are really weird. It's like the world is born out of an egg, and that kind of thing. It's kind of very interesting myths. And of course, often they have a particular meaning in that culture. And if you think about it, modern science as well, even though I think many scientists don't accept this. But usually the idea is that the world starts with a Big Bang. Yeah, that's the beginning of the world. And scientists realize that actually this is not really quite satisfactory. Yeah? And I remember the one scientist who said we can explain everything. Yeah, after the Big Bang we can explain everything. But Big Bang, yeah, that is the one miracle that we need. Yeah. And of course, science is not usually happy with miracles. Usually they want to go beyond miracles because it's not really part of the scientific method to have miracles at the very beginning, and then we can explain everything else. So Buddhism, in a sense, is the only teaching I have seen where actually there is no first point. Things just go back, and that fits very well with, again, with the idea of non-self. Why should there be a first point? That first point must have been caused by something else. So that there is a potentially endless sequence of cause and conditions. To me, fits with the way the world works. It kind of makes much better sense than the idea of an absolute beginning, which is very hard to really make sense of as far as I can see. So this is how the Buddha kind of explains this. There's little things like this, yeah, that makes the Buddha very true to reality, in my opinion. And then he says, yet it is evident that there is a specific condition for ignorance. In other words, there is one specific thing that tends to kind of give rise to ignorance. So what is that? And this is what this sutta now is going to talk about. I say that ignorance is fueled by something. It is not unfueled. And what is the fuel for ignorance? You should say the 5 hindrances. So here the idea of fuel, the other Pali word is ahara. It's like a nutriment, is another kind of well-known definition for this word. And when something is a nutriment or fuel for something, it feeds it. Yeah, it makes it grow. It makes it worse. This is kind of one of the points here, that if you keep having the 5 hindrances, the more you have of them, you're fueling ignorance. You're making it grow. You're making it stronger. You are creating more of a problem for that reason. And when you take away the fuel for something, you're making it weak. Yeah, you're actually taking away, you're kind of making it diminish, most likely, because it actually doesn't have the fuel that keeps it going. And if you keep that fuel away from something long enough, it reaches its maximum weakness. And this is the idea then on the Buddhist path. Even though you cannot eliminate ignorance simply by removing the hindrances, you can make avijja, ignorance, maximum weak, yeah, or I don't know, maximum weak, I'm not sure if that works, but anyway, as weak as possible, yeah. This is kind of what this is about. So this is already very useful information. And now you know why we are so obsessed about the 5 hindrances in Buddhism. When we talk about these things all the time, yeah, almost every retreat you go to, they will talk about the 5 hindrances one way or another, because these are really important. They are what sustain ignorance. These are really the cause of the whole problem of being able to see reality. This is what it's saying here. And now you know why we talk so much about how, overcoming the hindrances. Do you do it through vipassana or through samatha? Do you have to have jhana to overcome the 5 hindrances? All of these things now really matter, right? Because this is what enables you to either see things or not see things. So it kind of becomes very important. Once you start to see these little things, it starts to become you start to understand how all of this fits together. This is one of the great things about the suttas. The more you read them, the more you start to see this whole picture of how everything fits together. You read one term and straight away you know how it actually is part of this broad kind of picture or tapestry called the suttas. The way I like to think about it often is I imagine like the night of awakening of the Buddha. Yeah, he has this insight, he sees reality as it actually is. It's like a picture, it's like a flash, you see reality. It is often defined in the sutta as a lightning flash, the extreme entry. Bang, the light goes on. Whoa, this is what it looks like, you see reality. Yeah, and then that picture, then once it is expressed in words, it turns into all the suttas we have in 10,000 pages or whatever. It was kind of extraordinary. So that picture then, our job is to kind of put together all of these teachings so it actually goes back into being that picture that the Buddha saw on his awakening night. Every little teaching in the sutta has its place in this picture. It's like a jigsaw puzzle, all the pieces coming together. And when you see all the pieces together straight away, you know when each of these factors, where it fits into that picture of awakening, that flash bang. You see it all very clearly. This is the great thing about having a little bit of idea of the suttas. And sometimes you don't need to have that much of an idea. Sometimes if you know something like the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path, you will find that all of these teachings actually fit into that. Yeah, they fit in very beautifully, and you can understand all of these teachings in terms of the Four Noble Truths and Noble Eightfold Path. This teaching we're going to have a look at now, which starts off with ignorance being the fuel, five hindrances being the fuel of ignorance. Actually, ignorance is also the fuel of ignorance. It's kind of interesting. It's self-fueling, self-perpetuating, as they say. So this particular structure we're going to look at now, this particular sequence of causality, that too can be reduced to Noble Eightfold Path. It's kind of interesting. When you look at it in the right way, you will see this quite clearly, that actually it is just the Noble Eightfold Path expressed in a new way. And it is precisely that it is expressed in a new way that makes it so interesting. Because then you understand the path much better. You see the Noble Eightfold Path from all these various angles, it becomes clear to you what is going on. And this here is quite a different way of expressing the Noble Eightfold Path. That is why it is particularly interesting. So you can almost read every sutta of these 2,000 suttas in that light, and then you kind of expand your repertoire, the different angles from which to understand this. So it fuels it, right? It makes it strong, and if you take away the fuel, it makes it weaker. So this is the five hindrances. The five hindrances give you invested interest in the various things in the world. When you are attached to something, when you have a desire for something, you have a vested interest for that. You have, you expect certain outcomes from those things. That kind of what a vested interest means. And that is the exact opposite of seeing things according to reality. You want it to be in a certain way, and you will distort your vision. It will be distorted as a consequence of these five hindrances. So this is really the problem with these five hindrances. This distorted vision. It's like when you're angry, your vision is distorted. When you're angry, you think that things that you should not do, you think you must do them. I must tell them off. I must, stop making an end to this violence by being violent myself. Do make war to stop war. That kind of idea. More war, the war that ends all wars. And so it's the idea. So once you have that distorted idea in your mind, that kind of bias in your mind, then it will make you misunderstand reality. And often you know that because afterwards, when you come out of that anger, you look at exactly the same situation, and you wouldn't, when you are cool, when your mind is back in balance, you wouldn't do that thing. And then you know that the anger actually distorted the mind, got it out of balance, and it gave you a bias that actually was not really, is not really true to reality. This is one of the reasons when you feel upset about something, don't act. Because all of those actions that are driven, motivated by anger, every one of them is going to be biased. You're not really going to understand what you're doing. So you have to then, it's better not to do anything at all. If you feel really upset about something, go for a walk. Don't talk to anyone. As soon as you talk to someone, the bad things tend to come out as a consequence. So you have to be very careful when you feel upset about things. The same thing is the case when you have strong desires about things. This desire will always tell you this is important. I've got to do this. This really matters, right? And other people look at you and they will say, well, doesn't matter at all. Why are you so obsessed about this? And the reality again is that the desire is a kind of vested interest in the object of that desire. And the mind will then turn it into something you have to do. You have to do it. And you know, for example, an affair is kind of the obvious case in the world that everyone, a lot of people have affairs. There's some statistics of this. Very, very common in the world. And of course, that is again driven by this idea that this is important at the time. And afterwards, you usually regret it really badly because you destroy your relationships, you destroy so much by those things. But at the time, it's simply important. It's very hard to see clearly when you are in the grip of desire in this way. So that it distorts the mind. Yeah? So to enable the mind to see as clearly as possible, you have to reduce the defilements. And only when these 5 hindrances are completely gone, only then is there no distortion left in the mind. It had to be completely abandoned. And this is why this path is so difficult, because completely abandoning the 5 hindrances is very difficult, because they can be so refined. And there is really only one way that you can know that those hindrances have been completely abandoned. That is that you can enter a deep state of samadhi, because that is the proof that they are gone. Yeah, these are specific, these are states, you know, where there is no 5 hindrances, because that is how they are defined. They are defined as the absence of the 5 hindrances. Anything prior to jhana state, you just don't know. You have no idea whether it's completely gone or not. You're kind of fumbling in the dark, or whether you know whether it's actually disappeared. This is one of the reasons why the attaining of a jhana state is actually an incredibly useful thing to do for insight. There are many other reasons, but this is one of the reasons. The other important reason is that when you attain the deep state of samadhi, the hindrances are gone for a long time. Yeah, it's the power of that mind ensures that these hindrances don't actually have the ability to rise for a long time afterwards. And you need that stability to be able to, again, gain insight. Insight takes sustained attention on the phenomena of the mind and the body. And only that sustained attention will enable you to uncover these very difficult things that we're trying to see, like non-self, like the depth of impermanence in the mind. It's very, very hard to see unless you are super duper stable in your mental, in your mind. So this is why these things matter so much, yeah? And why these things are really important. Another important reason why jhana is important is actually easier to attain a jhana than to become a stream entry. People don't really seem to realize this, but it's actually much easier. The reason why it is easier is because to become a stream entry, you have to see everything as impermanent, everything as dukkha. You have to see have the full insight into non-self. Yeah? That is the definition of stream entry, the full insight into non-self. To attain a jhana, all you have to understand is the sensory world. If you have full insight into the sensory world in terms of non-self, suffering and impermanence, that is enough to attain a jhana state. But a stream entry requires a complete understanding of these things. So for that reason, it is much more profound. And because it's more profound, it really comes further down on the path. Yeah? So the natural sequence in practice is always jhana state prior to stream entry, because that is kind of the natural evolution of insight. It comes in that way. By the way, the jhana states are called jnanadasana. They are insights and knowledges and visions of the path, just like everything else, because they bring with them so much insight when you have this. So 5 hindrances are the fuel, for ignorance. I say that the 5 hindrances are fueled by something. They are not unfueled. What is the fuel of the 5 hindrances? You should say the 3 kinds of misconduct. Tini ducharitani. Yeah, this is really interesting, isn't it? Remember that sutta we had before about the 2 powers? The sutta on the 2 powers talks precisely about the 3 kinds of misconduct. How do you overcome the 3 kinds of misconduct? By reflecting in the right way. This paṭicca-samuppāda, the power of reflection. So if you reflect in the right way, then you overcome the 3 kinds of misconduct. And by doing that, you're already undermining the 5 hindrances massively now. Yeah, they're already being undermined heaps by that paṭicca-samuppāda, by the power of reflection, using them in the right way. you can see how far on the path these reflections can take you. Yeah, we here are getting very close to the abandoning the 5 hindrances. Then when you have a practice that paṭicca-samuppāda, the power of reflection, to abandon the 3 kinds of misconduct, then you're ready to do your meditation practice, as we discussed before. You watch your breath, you're abandoning the refined defilements of the mind, which is the 5 hindrances. Then avijja is undermined. And you can see it's kind of a very logical sequence here. Yeah, a lot of reflection, overcoming things, then meditation towards the very end, and then bang, overcoming avijja. Bang is a metaphor here. All right, so let's just carry on now. I said the 3 kinds of misconduct are fueled by something and they are not unfueled. And what is the fuel for the 3 kinds of misconduct? You should say lack of sense restraint. Yeah. So the reason for that is because the full good conduct only happens through sense restraint, because the full good conduct is verbal and bodily. But then Buddhist good conduct is also mental good conduct. So you only fulfill the 3 kinds of good conduct by having sense restraint. It's kind of the last bastion of the 3 kinds of good conduct. So if you don't have sense restraint, then you're going to have the 3 kinds of misconduct. Yeah, the mental aspect of it. So sense restraint here is what fuels the 3 kinds of misconduct, because it is the most refined part of it. It's about the mental misconduct. Yeah? And to purify, get rid of all misconduct, you have to sort out your mental misconduct. Mental misconduct is a very Buddhist idea. How can you have mental misconduct? It kind of sounds almost strange, doesn't it? But this is how the Buddhist path works. So, and this we have talked about at quite a bit of length, the idea of how to overcome the lack of sense restraint. Yeah, this is all about the sutta on overcoming resentment. It's all about the ideas of the similes, or how to overcome and let go of the sensory world. And all of these things are really about sense restraint. As I mentioned before, using wisdom power to overcome these things. So you can see how this thing is built up here. Lack of sense restraint is also fueled by something. It is not unfueled. And what is the fuel for lack of sense restraint? We should say lack of mindfulness and situational awareness. So here things are turned around from the usual way you find them in the sutta. Usually you find that sense restraint leads to mindfulness and situational awareness. But here, mindfulness and situational awareness is the cause, or the lack thereof, is the cause for the lack of sense restraint. Yeah. So, and again, it's kind of interesting. And I think the reason why this is the case in the sutta is because we're talking about the purification of these things, bringing them to a conclusion. Yeah, it's only when you have complete no misconduct that actually you can move on to removing the 5 hindrances. You have to really have proper sense restraint to be able to have the lack of misconduct. You have to have the lack of mindfulness and situational awareness to be able to have the lack of sense restraint. So these things are what complete the subsequent factor. And when it is completed, actually it requires mindfulness and situational awareness. So that's kind of how I see this. But you will also notice that the point here is that sometimes these things don't have necessarily a strict order. And the order they have will depend on the situation, and it will depend on how you look at the path. So the order can vary, and sometimes sometimes even though you're doing sense restraint, sometimes your verbal conduct may still not be perfect. Yeah? So you have to come back again to all these things. So the order should not be considered as too strict. There's a lot of overlap in these things. And some of that overlap you see by the fact that the order sometimes is reversed a little bit. So lack of mindfulness and situational awareness. And what exactly is mindfulness and situational awareness? And sati-sampajanya, and the way it is always defined in the suttas, is basically having an awareness of whether what you're doing is appropriate and suitable. This is kind of the idea behind this. Appropriate and suitable for what? Well, appropriate and suitable for the practice of the Noble Eightfold Path, yeah? But it leads you in the right direction. That is basically the idea of this particular factor. Yeah? It is defined in the commentaries in a fairly much broader way, but this is the basic idea of what it is about. So whatever you do in your life, you know, is this appropriate? Is it suitable for the practice? Is it going to lead to a peaceful mind? Is it going to lead to a reduction of defilements? Is it going to help building up the good qualities? Or is it going to reduce the good qualities of mind? Yeah, this is kind of what this is about. Actually, this is expressed in a different way also in the suttas. And Venerable Vimala was just mentioning yesterday this beautiful saying in the suttas that you should always decide on what you do. You decide, make a decision based on whether is this going to increase my good qualities and reduce the bad qualities, or is it going to increase the bad qualities and reduce the good qualities? Yeah, that kind of makes a big difference. And so this is one of the great ways to make choices in life. If you know that something is going to increase your good qualities and reduce the bad ones, then it is the right choice. If it is the opposite, then it is the bad choice. And this is really what situational awareness is about. You know the situation you are in. That's why it's called situational awareness, because it varies with the situation. When you're going to the village for alms, or whether you are eating or chatting or whatever you're doing, you understand in that specific situation, am I doing that which will lead to long-term benefit or not? That is really what situational awareness is about. So, you know, you avoid the casino, that kind of thing. I don't know if anyone ever goes to casinos, but I remember once I went to a casino. I was in Hong Kong, and I was living in Australia. I was already invited. My parents said, yeah, let's go somewhere. Yeah, we'll take you out. So they said, let's go to Hong Kong. And then we went to China afterwards. But in Hong Kong, we're sort of thinking, oh, maybe we should go to Macau. Yes, we had an extra, so we went to Macau, and Macau is kind of one of the gambling meccas of the world. Actually, the city, the town itself is very nice town. It's an old Portuguese town, yeah, and it's actually very, very sweet, a very charming town. It's nowhere as modern as Hong Kong. Yeah. Much more kind of, it has much more charm, I think, for that reason, in some ways. The town itself was very charming. Then you have all the casinos. You could live out of the town. It's these enormous modern buildings. These are the casinos. So I said, well, why don't we go and check out the casinos? And I was a monk, right? So when I came to the door, you could see it was not popular to have a monk going into the casino. I got that feeling straight away. You're not really welcome here. That's kind of the feeling I got. Yeah, we don't really want you here. I think it's considered bad luck for the casino owners to have monks going into the casino. They kind of nullify everything that's happening in there, in a sense. So when I got in, I went to the main door. Instead of going through the gaming room, I didn't want to go through the gaming room anyway. It feels really wrong as a monk. But I didn't even have a chance to go to the gaming room, because as soon as they saw me, they kind of took me through some back corridors, yeah, through some secret doorway and all kind of things. And so we got to the kind of back of the casino where all the restaurants are and all the shops are and that kind of thing. But for most people who go into the casino, you have to go through the gaming room. Yeah, that's kind of the whole point. And then once you go through the gaming room, we get into the rest of the place, which is just full of fancy shops and restaurants. This was called the Venetian, it was a brand new casino at that time. And so it's like Venice. So you have this kind of, it's really crazy, it's like up in the 10th floor or something, and you have this fellow in a gondola kind of pushing himself along like they do in Venice, right? Completely nuts. You can imagine the kind of expense of building these things. But what is interesting about it is the kind of the atmosphere there. Yeah, the atmosphere is kind of oppressive and dark and negative. It's kind of anti-Dhamma. You know, this kind of where you are so immersed in the five senses, immersed in that world of gambling, immersed in that world, which is kind of a dark world where people are really obsessed. Yeah, people who gamble are often very obsessive kind of people. They can't stop. That's why they go back to the gambling floor all the time. And that whole atmosphere in the casino is kind of is suffused with that sort of feeling to it. And you know, I don't know, I knew straight away when I got in there, I don't belong here. That's kind of the feeling you get straight away. And but it was still very interesting to see. Yeah, you learn something from those experiences. My parents even, they don't, I don't know if they can call them Buddhists, but they didn't like it either. Yeah? And so it's kind of this natural kind of repulsion to want that kind of thing. Yeah? So this is basically the idea. You know that this is not the way to place to hang out, so you don't hang out there. This leads to decline in good qualities. It was very obvious to me. It leads to, you know, I didn't stay on, so those good qualities, bad qualities can disappear fairly quickly. But that's kind of the idea behind it. So you can get an idea, yeah, what is good. Use the internet wisely, or if you can, don't use it at all. Kind of this is sort of the thing, yeah, because there's so many things there which kind of just upset you and make you angry and do all kind of things to you. So this is the idea of mindfulness and situational awareness. It goes deeper. The Buddha talks about 4 aspects of this, and there is the I can't really remember the Pali word. I think it's paṭicca-samuppāda and atta-samuppāda, something like that. These are the first 2. And then there is the gochara-samuppāda, and I think the asamoha-samuppāda, I think are the 4 ways. These are this is only found in the commentary, but they kind of make sense. Sometimes, as I said yesterday, you can use the commentaries and they can give you some nice information about some of these things you cannot find in the suttas. So the first 2, atta-samuppāda and sappāya-samuppāda, have to do with suitability and purpose, yeah, whether it actually works to your benefit. The third kind of samuppāda is the gochara-samuppāda, which means that you're supposed to be with your meditation object at all times. And this is very interesting, yeah, because people take from that that when you go about your daily life, you're supposed to have your meditation in mind at all times. That's what they take from this. And one of the reasons they take this from this is because this passage on samuppāda, going out, going in, stretching your limbs, taking them back, eating and not eating, speaking and not speaking, that is actually found in the Satipatthana Sutta. And the Satipatthana Sutta is basically about meditation practice. They assume that you're supposed to meditate in daily life, keeping your meditation object in mind. And this is why this is so interesting when you actually study the Satipatthana Sutta in much greater detail. And you realize that that particular passage about samuppāda, going back, going forward, stretching your limbs, well, all of that actually does not belong in that sutta at all. It belongs in a very different part of the path. It belongs much earlier, prior to Satipatthana practice. And this can be shown, yeah, again by comparative studies, that actually, in all likelihood, that has been added at a later date to the Satipatthana Sutta to broaden it, to give some additional exercise, whatever. But really, it is not really part of ordinary meditation at all. So when we talk about sati sampajanya or sampajanya, especially the way it is defined in the commentaries, is that this preliminary sati sampajanya that you do in ordinary life, that is all about. And there is another sati sampajanya, and that is sampajanya in meditation itself. When you go to the Satipatthana Sutta, it says that you do meditation, you do it satima atapi sampajano vinaya loka vidanamanasanga. Satima, mindful, atapi, with energy, sampajano, with clear comprehension. And it doesn't mean situational awareness anymore at that point. Sati sampajanya means situational awareness, but sampajanya on its own does not mean like that. And it's only when you come to meditation practice, when you sit down and you do proper meditation, that is where sampajanya means you stay with your meditation object at all times. That is what that aspect of the commentary actually makes sense. It does not make sense in ordinary life. And this idea of having a meditation object with you at all times, I think it's a bad misunderstanding of the Dhamma. It leads to all kinds of problems for people in daily life. I know people have tried this. Some of the people who have tried this, I don't know, they come across as not very, have been very impressed with the results of doing that. They seem almost more scattered than you would otherwise be. Because if you try to be aware of the breath and you also have to do other things, actually it's just a big mess. Yeah, it doesn't work. You have to focus on one thing at a time. That's kind of the whole point of mindfulness. You are aware of what you're doing when you are washing your dishes. Yeah? You wash your dishes, you don't wash your breath. Otherwise, you're doing two things at the same time. You're going to break those cups. Is that right? If you try to be aware of the breath and also wash, you're going to break everything. There was a story of one of my fellow monastics who tried to do this practice on Pindabat. Yeah? Pindabat, all you have to do is walk around and people put food in the bowl. That's all you have to do. And so I thought, yeah, it's easy. I just have to walk so I can just watch the breath at the same time. But he had very good mindfulness. So he watched his breath so carefully that before he knew it, he had gone down the wrong street. He wasn't aware of where he was going, and because his mind was so occupied with the breath. So he realized actually it's impossible to be aware of your meditation object and do other things at the same time. And actually, when you understand these suttas properly, when you have a good understanding of the history of the Satipatthana Sutta, how it is put together, you realize it is a misunderstanding. It is a misunderstanding that arrives from the modern interpretation of the sutta, when the sutta is taken literally the way it stands, when actually it probably shouldn't be taken that way at all. This is getting into the deep end of how the suttas are structured. And so I'm not going to show you all of that. I did a course on Satipatthana recently that you can have a look at if you wish. But I think the evidence for these kind of things is overwhelmingly strong. I wouldn't dare to say it, but I think the evidence was very strong for these things. So this is sutta-samuppāda. Yeah, you're only aware of the object when you actually meditate properly, you sit down, not in daily life. That is not what sutta-samuppāda means in daily life. And then an even more profound aspect of sampajanya is the aspect that comes with insight practice. And that is the asamoha sampajanya, which means the clear awareness of non-delusion. Moha is delusion, samoha is delusion. That is a very profound aspect. So the four commentary aspects of sampajanya need to be understood sequentially, not all at the same time. This, I think, is another fairly common misunderstanding. These four things all apply simultaneously. Actually, they don't. They really only apply depending on where your practice is at. All right. So let's move on then. What is the fuel for lack of mindfulness and situational awareness? And you should say improper attention. Improper attention is ayoniso manasikara. Yeah, one of these very fundamental aspects of the Buddhist path, as I mentioned before, sometimes mentioned as standing at the very source of the Buddhist path. To get going, you need a little bit of yoniso manasikara, a little bit of wise attention, proper attention, otherwise nothing happens. So what is proper attention? Proper attention, all of these things are very closely linked to each other, almost hard to disentangle. Yeah? If you have sense restraint, you have proper attention. If you have situational awareness, you also have proper attention. But proper attention is more fundamental than the other things. Proper attention refers to everything. Yeah, at any time, from the very beginning, you become a Buddhist, or even when you're not a Buddhist, or even just interested in spirituality, meditation, whatever it might be. Yeah? Anytime you do something which is good for you, then you are having yoniso manasikara. Everything you do something is bad, and you have bad yoniso manasikara. And by good and bad, I come back to this idea again that I mentioned just before, increasing good qualities, or increasing bad qualities. So increasing the good and making the bad ones decline, or increasing the bad and making the good ones decline. That is the distinction between yoniso manasikara and ayoniso manasikara. And it is defined as that in the Sabhasava Sutta, the second sutta, the Majjhima Nikaya. So everything, right? Everything you do. So it's kind of this all-encompassing thing. Yeah? So yoniso manasikara is always that about being circumspect in everything. Yeah? Trying to attend to the world in the right way. Manasikara means attention. And we are always attending to something, right? There's always attention in the mind. So there's always the question, is that attention good or is it bad? Where is it coming from? This is one of those key things on the path. And you know one from the other simply by knowing how your mind is developing. People often ask, how do you have Yonasomanassikara, right? How can we have Yonasomanassikara? What does it actually mean? How do I know? Have I got it now? Is this Yonasomanassikara? Is that Yonasomanassikara? How can I develop it more? How can I reflect in such a way as to have Yonasomanassikara? So, how can we have Yonasomanassikara? Well, this sutta is going to tell you, right? This is the good thing about this sutta, because everything is conditioned. Everything is caused by something else. So it says, I say that improper attention is fueled by something it is not unfueled. What is the fuel for improper attention? You should say lack of faith. And this is kind of one of these really surprising things. Proper attention or wise attention is a wisdom faculty. It's a kind of wisdom that we use in ordinary life to attend to the right thing, to avoid the bad things. We remind ourselves of where happiness is to be found, where suffering is to be found, and then that helps us to attend always to the right thing. So it is a kind of wisdom faculty, and here the Buddha is saying that faith is the cause of this wisdom faculty. It's very kind of counterintuitive. The first thing to understand about this is that the Pali word for faith here is saddha. And saddha does not mean faith as it often means in other religions. In Buddhism, faith, or this word saddha, is closer to the idea of confidence. Actually, it is a bit of both. It is both faith and confidence, really. Well, confidence means that when you hear something and you start to understand what it is about, you feel confident that it is true because you think it is true to your experience of the world, right? So you feel confident about it. It's more like an intellectual saying, yeah, this makes sense because it fits with how the world is. But the idea of faith and why faith is so important is that faith is usually an emotional thing. If you have strong faith in something, whatever religion you come from, even if you're not religious at all, but you have faith in something, it often comes with being inspired. There's an emotional uplift that comes with faith. And that is also an aspect of the word saddha. It also comes with that emotional uplift. And this is why we shall see later on this idea of the recollections in Buddhism, where you recollect various things, you recall the Buddha. That's like the faith aspect of the Buddha. The purpose is to give rise to the emotional aspect of saddha. So that's why it's hard to translate, because it has both the idea of confidence in it, because you really understand what is going on, you understand what the Buddha is, the Dhamma is. Based on that understanding and confidence, that is where the joy comes from, which is simply to the faith idea of things. So it straddles those two words. Maybe we can coin something new. I'm not sure how that would be. Was faith, confidence, kind of a compound? I don't know. That's too hard to say. Too much of a mouthful. Okay, we will try to think of something, but maybe saddha can be called inspiration. There are other words that are translated as inspiration, but maybe saddha can be called inspiration, because inspiration has the idea of understanding and also the idea of emotions. Maybe, I don't know, it's always, one of the things I find is that I always think this word should be translated different. Yeah, but here is a better translation. And then I look more broadly. I realize that I'm probably mistaken. All the other translators got it right. Because there are so many contexts, there's so many ways in which these words are used, that to actually find the best translation is often incredibly hard. If you know people who make dictionaries, there's one dictionary called the Critical Pali Dictionary, and the first letter of the alphabet, took about, how long did it take? 40 years, I think, to make the first letter of the Pali alphabet, the letter A. It was 20 years, I remember. Long time, right? Because this is precisely for this reason. It's actually very hard to know the translation of the words unless you study the whole Paṭicca properly and more as well. So I usually find that actually, I always think, I guess I'm a little bit arrogant and kind of conceited, usually conceited. That goes with goes with the terrain. If you're human, you're going to be a little bit conceited one way or another anyway. So I just accept my own conceit, I suppose. And I think I know the better translation. Usually I turn out to be wrong here. The conceit always gets humbled. Maybe that's a good thing. Yeah. I think that's a good thing, actually. And then you kind of come back to earth, you realize the limitations of your own understanding. But I still say that maybe, I'm probably wrong, but maybe inspiration is another possible translation of saddha. So I'm not going to say anything more than that. After a while, you start to realize your limitations. Yeah. So this is fascinating, yeah? This idea that faith gives rise to proper attention. And the reason that works, of course, is because initially you have confidence in the teachings of the Buddha. And then you just take on board what the Buddha says. The Buddha says, if you don't want to be angry, attend like this. Yeah, attention is manasikara. Attend in this way. Then you will have yoniso manasikara. And because you say you are a follower of the Buddha, you are one of the Buddha's sheep, you just go along after the Buddha. You go along after the Buddha. You do exactly what the Buddha says, right? And so because you do what the Buddha says, that faith, that confidence in the teachings lead to you having yoniso manasikara. You're attending on things in the right way. So that is the kind of the initial point why that works. But it also works because in Buddhism, there is no real distinction between faith and wisdom. And this is kind of really fascinating about the Buddha's teachings. Yeah, when you start to have faith because you are applying the Buddha's teachings, there is a degree of wisdom in what you're doing already. It is already based on a degree of confidence, hopefully right kind of confidence, because there is a certain investigation there into reality already. And the more you practice in accordance with the suttas, the more powerful your confidence tends to become. This is the ideal. Anyway, this is what is supposed to happen. It may not happen, but that's kind of the ideal on the path. The more you practice, the more powerful your confidence becomes because you start to see that this actually works. And of course, the more you practice, you grow in wisdom. So wisdom and confidence, saddha and paṭicca, always grow together in the Buddhist practice. They are almost like two sides of the same coin. And then eventually, when you become a stream mentor, when you see things fully according to reality, when your wisdom kind of reaches its pinnacle point, yeah, you become to the very top of wisdom. That is also when confidence or faith or saddha becomes solid. It becomes avejja. It becomes what they call unshakable. Attachment is bad, but sometimes I wish the rope would attach a bit more to my body. It keeps on falling off. So some attachments are good. This would be a good attachment. I always have this problem, ropes falling off. Anyway, going astray here again. So so faith and confidence, two sides of the same coin. When confidence reaches its peak, its pinnacle, same thing for faith, for wisdom. Yeah, always going together in this way. And so this is kind of unique, yeah, in Buddhism. And very often in the world, very often a more faith-based kind of a spiritual life or whatever, where faith often has a much stronger kind of core value, where faith kind of becomes almost like the end of the path in certain situations. And that is actually, from Buddhist point of view, it's actually quite problematic, because you're supposed to know what you're doing. You're supposed to be doing it because it makes sense and not kind of contradict sense in the world. So this is what is going on here. So faith leads to proper attention, yeah, or lack of faith is improper attention. I say lack of faith is fueled by something, it is not unfueled. What is the fuel for lack of faith? You should say listening to an untrue teaching. Dhamma is the Pali word for untrue teaching. Yeah, there are teachings in the world, philosophies in the world, religions in the world, yeah, that lead you astray very often. There are some very powerful examples in the sutta, some kind of really strange kind of religions. And one of these religions was like, if you go around and you kill everything you can see, go around the southern side of the river Ganges, we kill every living being into one massive mountain of flesh. You've done nothing wrong here. Kind of weird religion, isn't it? I don't wonder how anyone comes up with these kind of ideas. And so this is kind of how listening to the untrue teachings can be very detrimental. And of course, there are a variety of degrees here of truth in teachings. A teaching can take you so far or so far, depending on kind of how it is. But ultimately, you want something that is as true as possible to reality. Yeah, that is the real true teaching. And of course, in Buddhism, it is the Buddha's teachings that is the pinnacle of true teachings, obviously. According to the Buddha, it is the only teaching that fully fathoms or fully understands the idea of non-self. It is unique in that sense. So how do we avoid the bad teachings? I say listening to an untrue teaching is fueled by something. It is not unfueled. And what is the fuel of listening to an untrue teaching? You should say associating with bad people. Actually, bad here is not an entirely satisfactory word. Asapurisa, it literally means that those people are not noble ones, non-Aryas. And not everyone who is not an Arya is a bad person. There would be many bad people in the world if that was the case. 99.9999% of people would be bad. So it would probably be better to say something like associating with maybe, if you think of the saparis of the noble ones as superior people, we can maybe call ordinary people inferior compared to the superior people. Maybe you can call it inferior people, or associating with non-Aryas, not even more, maybe even more. But the point, of course, that the worse the person is, the further away they are from the truth, the worse it is. Ideally, what you want to do is hang out with the noble ones. So how do you hang out with the noble ones? That becomes the question then, right? Okay, so we should not hang out with bad people. We should hang out with the noble ones. How do we do that? That becomes a very interesting question. If that is so important, we should not hang out with the non-noble ones. How on earth do we hang out with the noble ones? How do you, when you go into the street, which ones of those people in the street are noble ones? Which ones are not? When you go to the pub and you chat with people, how many noble ones are around that table? When you drink your beer at night? Probably not so many. So that's maybe the wrong place to hang out. Okay, so what should we do? It becomes a very fascinating. This is why people asked before, how do we know who the arahants are? It doesn't even have to be an arahant. It can be a stream mentor, right? They are also noble ones. How do we know how these people are? And the simple answer to this question, are you ready for the answer to this question? This is exciting, right? The best way to hang out with the noble ones is to read the suttas. When you read the suttas, you're hanging out with the Buddha. The Buddha is the highest of all noble ones. The Buddha is the real Kalyanamitta. There's no Kalyanamitta, no good spiritual friend higher than the Buddha. As I said before, if anyone is awakened in the history of Buddhism, it must be the Buddha. If the Buddha wasn't awakened, well, what are we doing here? Right? The whole thing kind of falls apart. It is based on that conviction that the Buddha knew what he was talking about. We may have doubt about anyone else in the whole history of Buddhism, but the Buddha, we cannot really doubt. Or we can doubt, but then really the whole thing falls apart. So for that reason, the word of the Buddha is the foundation of everything. And this is why we are trying on this retreat to hang out a little bit with the Buddha. This is why I do these kind of things. I'm trying to kind of encourage us all to hang out more with the Buddha. Unfortunately, it has to be filtered through me. That's very unfortunate. I wish it could be filtered by someone more kind of really, really super duper powerful. But sometimes you have to make do with what you get. Don't know what to say about that. Sorry. But sometimes still it can be quite nice, just by reading it. And if you have someone who has an understanding of the sutta that is reasonably well, understands kind of what is going on here, it can still be quite inspiring, actually. This is kind of cool. And I love this because I find it inspiring as well. I just have to read the suttas, and I can read the same sutta every day, every kind of retreat I do for 10 years. So like 60 times over 10 years, and I still find it inspiring because they say something profound about your condition, and they kind of, you know that this is it feels right, and so you feel inspired, especially when you talk about it, and we're going to bring it up in this way. So hang out with the Buddha. Who else should we hang out with? Okay, the Buddha is a bit kind of far away. Yeah, you may not, I don't know what kind of connection you feel you have with the Buddha. Do you feel you have a connection with the Buddha? You have much more connection with the Buddha than you think you have. But maybe let's leave that for another time. I'm going to tell you about the connection with the Buddha. I'm going to tell you specifically about that when we come to the Buddha Nusati, the recollection of the Buddha later on. Maybe we'll talk about it before as well, certainly then. So how to make a real connection with the Buddha, to make the Buddha your teacher, that becomes really important. In the meantime, as I said before, it is also useful to have some living examples of teachers as well. Yeah, very useful to find someone you feel inspired by, someone who has all the right qualities, someone who has that purity and kindness and all those indications that there are quite possibly noble ones. Yeah? That is very, very useful. But never take your stand fully on an ordinary teacher. Because if you take your stand fully that this person is enlightened, this is very common in the world for this to happen, sometimes you will get bitterly disappointed because they may turn out to be dodgy. I like the word dodgy. They may turn out to be dodgy. Yeah? They may turn out to do bad things. They may turn out to abuse their disciples. They may turn out not to be the real deal. And this is unfortunately quite common in the world. And it's very interesting. Sometimes the very really charismatic people can also turn out to be dodgy. Because the charisma is a worldly kind of charisma. It is kind of this power or ability to attract students. They're not really aloof from the world. So if someone is very charismatic, be careful. Yeah? Charisma in itself is not really an indicator that someone is a powerful person. The power of the person should really be recognized through their sila, through their conduct, through their detachment, through the ability to live this path fully, through the ability to enter samadhi, all of these kind of things. That is how you actually know someone's level, if you like, whether there are noble ones or not. So let me stop there. The time has just gone past 10:03.
I just want to introduce to you Vimala, who's sitting behind you. Some of you might be younger, many of you might not. And he is one of the founding members of Sutta, who's organizing this retreat. Actually, probably the most important founding member, because he's done the most. And he's currently also translating all the suttas into German. So it's a huge job, lifelong job. And I think some of you also have the German conference there from Dependent Origination. I think you always also translated that. Yes, so she translated that. And at the end of this retreat, you'll have more booklets in German that she translated. So she's only here for the day, unfortunately, but very welcome. So it's lovely to have you here. And the other announcement I like to have is this afternoon at tomorrow we'll do in this hall we'll do guided desk contemplation, 2 different ones. And then afterwards we'll go to the cemetery to walking meditation and maybe chanting for the soldiers there. So, of course, you're welcome to come along. You don't have to. Everything's optional here. So, I just wanted to let you know that this is happening.
Sadhu.
And we have to do this, sorry. So, on 3. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Sorry, I can't pronounce it.
We have a German man in our monastery who says sadhu. He's the loudest sadhu speaker in the world. He does it in our monastery every day, and he's famous in our monastery for sadhu. Dhamma Buddha. Stefan is his name in German, and I think his hearing is a bit bad. So he thinks he says an ordinary voice, but he shouts it out. Right? It's really, really cool. So he should. I think we've given the name Sadhukaro, the one who says sadhu. That's kind of his public name. Anyway, have a